And I think we are ready to start with our first speakers this afternoon. Could I welcome Dr. Liza, Selley and Rebeka Popovic from Cambridge University.
Hi, everyone. Okay, let me just share my screen. Can everyone see the slides? Okay. So hello, my name is Rebeka, and I'm here today with my colleague Liza, and she's an expert in air pollution. And we're going to talk to you about our study, which is about links between air pollution and COVID-19 in England. First, we'll give you a little bit of background, and then we'll take you through our study, and then in the end, we can discuss some potential mechanisms, and in the end, we'll leave you with some open questions.
Hi everybody, thank you for having us. As I'm sure you're aware already, air pollution is a combination of toxic gases and particles that is produced during the everyday activities of people, for example, burning wood or driving. And unfortunately, it builds up a lot in populated places, and a lot of it is small enough so that we can inhale it into the lungs, where it can cause inflammation. And the result of that can vary. It can be very minor, from just irritation, having to clear your throat a little bit more regularly, all the way to causing diseases like asthma and COPD, and sadly, in some instances, causing death. Thank you. Recently, researchers across the globe, in China, in America, and in Italy, have associated air pollution exposure with COVID-19 risk. The reason they wanted to look at this was because several of the risk factors that have been reported for catching and having severe life-threatening COVID-19 can actually be caused or worsened by exposure to air pollution. So things like having asthma again, or COPD, diabetes, they've all been linked with air pollution already. The biological reason behind this link is still being explored, but we've noticed severe COVID-19 has been linked with excessive inflammation in the lungs, and we know already that pollution can cause a background inflammation that could kind of kickstart this. Also, pollutants can make the lungs less able to clear out germs. They prevent the immune cells that we have from doing their job of hoovering up germs. And so people that live in polluted places could be having less protection against infections developing.
So our study had two aims. The first aim was to identify the link between air pollution and COVID-19 deaths and cases. And we did this by using publicly available data. We wanted to explore this relationship in the population and also at an individual level. So we looked at three different levels, so regional, sub-regional, and individual exposure level. And we did this by using regression models. And the second objective was to identify the sources causing this air pollution that is associated with COVID-19. On the right-hand side, you can see our preprint. So if you want to read about our study in more details, feel free to do that. It's available online. Okay, first, to assess if there is a link between air pollution and COVID-19 at all, we first looked at this large-scale regional level. As you can see on this heat map, here we show the number of COVID-19 cases and COVID-19 deaths, and in the bottom row, we present air quality values. And for example, if you focus on London, I think it will be the easiest to follow. You can see that there is a positive association between the levels of nitrogen dioxide and nitrogen oxide and COVID-19 deaths and cases. And there was a negative association between ozone and COVID-19 deaths and cases. Well, ozone has been seen to cause inflammation. Ozone can also react with chemicals produced by cars, and it makes it convert into other gases. So ozone is usually the highest in the countryside or in the suburbs, and lower in areas with large traffic, such as London. So we think that this negative association comes from this. Then we wanted to look at things in more detail. So we expanded our analysis. We expanded the resolution of our analysis, looking at local authority levels. And we also increased the number of air pollutants that we studied. And again, consistently with what we've seen before, just to tell you first, so this figure shows the mortality rate. So this is how much does an air pollutant increase the risk for mortality. As you can see, nitrogen oxide and nitrogen dioxide, they increase the risk of mortality consistently with the original model, but also we found out that sulfur dioxide is highly associated with the mortality risk from COVID-19. Then we wanted to look at an individual level, and we used data from the UK Biobank. I don't know if everyone here knows about the UK Biobank. It is a health repository which contains health data from more than 500,000 participants, and this health data can be used in health research. So what we did is we used the location from the UK Biobank had tested around 1,500 people for COVID, and within this cohort they had 700 people that tested positive. So what we did is that we used the locations of the participants to calculate the individual, the exposure to air pollutants from the individuals. Then we compared that between COVID positive and COVID negative individuals to assess if there is a particular air pollutant which increases the risk for COVID infectivity. And we saw here that again, nitrogen oxide were positively associated with COVID risk of infection. And we also saw that the particulate matters, PM10 and PM2.5, were associated with an increased risk for COVID infection. And this is in line with the hypothesis that viruses could maybe attach to air pollutants, but Liza will tell you more about that in a moment. So where does this air pollution come from? So we know for sodium dioxide, the majority comes from the industries. Nitrogen oxides can be found to be high in areas with loads of traffic. Also particulates can be caused by road transport, but they're also present from residential combustion. And this is, for example, from wood smoke. So if you have a wood stove and you burn wood, then there could be increased levels of particulates that you can be in contact with. So we also wanted to assess it for ourselves. So which were the major sources of fossil fuel consumption in England, which associated with these air pollutants that we found to be linked to COVID-19. And we found that the domestic manufactured solid fuels, so this is this domestic combustion that I was referring to, and commercial petroleum, this is a residual fuel from commercial and industrial combustion, to be the biggest predictors of the air pollutants that we found associated with COVID-19.
Thank you. So to summarise, we have linked nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide and ozone, some really common pollutants, with the risk of mortality from COVID-19 in England. And this is mirroring the results of similar studies that have been performed globally. So we're quite confident with the results. The reason still needs to be explained in the lab, but it could be due to background lung inflammation that we see with pollution already. And potentially that could be adding to the effects of having existing health complications once you've caught the disease. In terms of infectivity, we're still seeing the link with nitrogen oxides, but also particulate matter. And this is sort of saying that perhaps when we're estimating the R0 values, we need to be considering local pollution levels and thinking of it as less of a countrywide thing, but more local. Again, in terms of the mechanism, we're still not sure, but it could be something to do with reducing the function of immune cells, making us more susceptible to the virus, because particles in particular have been linked with preventing the lungs from clearing infection. Also, as Rebeka mentioned earlier, there's the magic carpet hypothesis, which, as you can imagine, is very similar to the Disney idea, whereby the virus could be hitching a ride on particles, meaning that it has a larger spread capacity, and if you inhale it, you're more likely to be exposed to the virus that way. So the final thing that we found was that commercial petrol and domestic fuel burning can create a lot of the pollution that associates with this disease. And so really the take-home message is that it is vital that we continue strengthening our restrictions on these emissions. So thank you so much for listening to us. Before we move on to questions, we really wanted to acknowledge the boys in the group who've done a lot of work on this study. They've been working night and day, weekends, weekdays, and so well done to them. And finally, before we move on to your questions, we have a few in the lab that we've been floating around, so it'd be great to hear your opinions. Firstly, we're wondering, how are we going to protect against a rise in pollutants once lockdown is eased? Travelling by car, of course, is a good idea in terms of reducing viral transmission between people, but it could be leading to an increase in emissions that associate with COVID. So you have a bit of a cycle going on there. Is this going to affect the resolution of the pandemic or contribute to another peak, particularly, for example, in winter when people start burning more wood and there's more particles in the air? Secondly, we're thinking about how is lockdown itself impacting our exposure to air pollution. You know, people are spending a lot more time at home at the moment where we've got sources of these pollutants. We're yet to find out what are the impacts of indoor air pollution on COVID risk, but I think this is going to be an important thing to look at. However, it's a little bit difficult to do in terms of logistics, but also ethics, because in order to do that, you need to have access to people's homes. So thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I think we'll go straight into a couple of questions that have appeared in the chat. The first one from Caroline Russell, who is a councillor and also member of the London Assembly. How have you checked the correlation between air pollution and density of COVID-19 cases is not linked to population density rather than polluted air?
May I? So we checked for confounding variables, one of which was population density. So we did that, and the association still holds.
The same question was raised by Jessica Finch. Sorry, Goldfinch, I do apologise. At present, this is correlation rather than proven causation. Is that the question? Is that correct? It is correlation rather than causation?
Yes.
And what was the probability of the results?
Sorry?
She's asking a question on replication studies.
Well, what do you mean by replication studies? I mean, the only thing we can say is that, like, we've used data from England, and other studies in Italy, US, and China, they've used data from different populations, and they've also arrived to the same conclusion that air pollution has an effect on COVID-19. I don't know if this answers your question.
Follow-up question from Caroline Russell, re the magic carpet hypothesis. Are you aware of any research into this effect on COVID transmission in the underground system? I'm presuming that was the tube system.
I'm not aware of that study in particular, but I know that some colleagues have got funding to start looking at the underground. We've been quite limited in permission to collect samples from it. I've been working quite a lot on brake dust, which is very similar to what you get in the underground, because a lot of that is coming from the braking of the trains, so you've got friction between the wheels and the rails, so it's very metallic. People are looking at the effect of different materials on how long the virus can survive on different surfaces, and metals in particular are coming up as something that is actually killing the virus quicker. So for once, that might be a slight positive, but that's just me speculating. It would be a very interesting study to look at.
Thank you. Question from Caroline Birch. What are the sources of pollutants in the home?
There's quite a few, actually. It does concern me when I hear about it. So, for example, even your sofa, it's been treated with things to make it less flammable. And these are all chemicals that can be released, you know, from carpets and things. You've got paint. In terms of our behaviours, cooking is a big source of pollution. Sometimes, you get a smoky wok, that kind of thing is going to be releasing pollution. Wood burning, of course, is a big one. And you also have pollutants coming into the home from outside. So the interface between indoor and outdoor pollution is becoming quite a hot topic now, to really understand what we have in the home a bit better.
A question from, Rebeka, could I ask you to stop screen sharing?
Yeah.
Right, is that possible? Thank you. No, thank you. The question was from Caddy Beck. Are you intending to do any direct studies of survival of the virus in the presence of particulates, like they are currently doing to determine virus survival on surfaces? I'm assuming that is the length of time the virus survives on different surfaces like metal, wood, plastic, various sort of kind of things.
Yeah, we've got some colleagues at the University of Cambridge, and they've started looking into a model to do pretty much exactly that, looking at A, how is the virus attaching to particles, and B, does it survive there? Because that's going to be the really important thing in terms of, is that affecting infectivity?
Thank you. A question from Maddie Davis. We have also observed that COVID-19 cases and mortality are both socially distributed, i.e. high risk of severe infection and mortality in those from disadvantaged backgrounds. Given that UK biobank data reflects a wealthier, healthier and whiter part of the population, what impact may this have on your individual level results?
So if I understood the question correctly, so you're asking about other compounding variables that might affect the spread of the virus, such as the economical status. Was that the question? Sorry, I can't hear that well.
Yeah, that's what I got, yeah.
So from the UK biobank data, we actually had a very extensive list of confounding variables, which was also the economic status, multiple underlying diseases like increased pressure, also smoking. So we did account for that. And yeah, if you want to know in more detail, you can read about it in our study. We just didn't want to mention everything because then we would be here talking about it all day.
Thank you very much. Just a quick technical question. I've had a comment that my sound is sort of is quite noisy. Can everyone hear me correctly? Clearly?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'll try it. It might be that my laptop is picking up some of the external sound. I do apologise for that if it's not making it clear. Further question from Jessica Goldfinch. What was the p-value of the results? Replication studies. Sorry. Yes.
Oh, sorry. So everything was 0.05. So I don't know if I've mentioned during my presentation. So the values that were in red were statistically significant. So the everything I mentioned was significant.
Right. Follow-up question to that was replication studies have to also apply here. So I'd expect replication here in the UK at some point. Funding committed, of course. I assume that's a statement. A question from Emma Bateman. I live in a coastal region with very high levels of PM 2.5, some of the highest in the country. I believe that coastal areas give high readings of PM 2.5, though it is unclear why this is the case. It is certainly not from excessive traffic. Is it likely that areas like mine, presumably coastal areas, will see a spike once the virus spreads out from congested areas?
I think it's hard to answer this question in particular because the amount of air pollution and the concentrations, they vary on multiple factors. So it's like the source of pollution, it's also the weather, the wind, and all of these factors. So I don't think I can answer this question without knowing all of these details. Yeah. Sorry.
I think we'll know more once we've learned a bit more about that magic carpet idea and how much that's contributing. And also for that, it would be good to learn what are those extra particles so we can look at the materials. I don't know where you live. I know Southampton, people are showing there's a lot of shipping emissions. So with the reductions in cruises and things, that might be beneficial. It's hard to say at the minute, I think.
A question from Liz McCallum. I think she might have missed the beginning of the presentation. What were the estimated number of deaths associated with air pollution in the UK pre-COVID-19?
I think the more recent estimations have been something between 38,000 and 40,000 premature deaths. Yeah, a horrible number.
We're getting a nod from Rosamund. Rosamund, would you like to comment on that, if that's possible?
No, she is right.
Yes.
Between 36,000 and 40,000 each year. And it's 7 million worldwide. But that's both indoor and outdoor.
Right, thank you.
Thanks, Rosamund.
Thank you.
A further question from Caroline Russell. On the underground, there are very high particle numbers, but different from the above ground particles. High metal content and not combustion particles as per street air. Liza, that was super interesting. Yes, it was, thank you. Yes, we will put in contact details in the agenda, which we will post out, which is the PDF of the discussion, which is the biographies of the speakers, a paragraph about their research, and they're happy to have their contact details on that. When we post the full video onto the YouTube channel, it will have the same information about the background and the speakers, but we will obviously be redacting the contact information from that.
Caroline, sorry to put a plug in here. We had a paper come out on brake dust toxicity in January, some colleagues of mine from King's College. So I can send you the link for that if you like. It's in Metallomics.
I think what we can do is we can post them to the potentially the Facebook page for the Green Party Women, and then we can share that information out if that would be helpful. A quick question from Jennifer Howells. Did you look at how the weather, i.e. whether it was windy or this air was still, to have an effect on a reference to air pollution and the virus?
I think, I mean, our data was from the from Debrah, so I think for some of the values they were controlled for weathers, but for some of them I think they were not. And this is a major limitation of the majority of studies like this, is that there's so many confounding factors to include. And yeah, this is definitely a limitation.
Yeah,
but yeah,
it's particularly affected because it's springtime, which in the UK is the highest sort of peak for air pollution because of the weather. The prevailing wind means we get a lot of pollution coming over from the continent. So we may be finding different results now to if it had happened in a different season.
A quick question from Caroline Birch. On the coast, are we more exposed to shipping pollution?
I think it depends where on the coast and how close the shipping lanes would be. There are definitely pockets, you know, with ports where you get the ships spending time at shore, and instead of using their electrics, they're still burning diesel. And that's what I've heard about previously in presentations. That creates a lot of pollution, as you can imagine. You know, these big ships, often there for a couple of days. So it creates big spikes. I imagine if it's stuff happening out at sea, it'll be a little bit like getting the pollutant off the continent. You know, when we get these Sahara dust episodes, things like that, where it would affect maybe the coast first, but then moving inland as well. Depends how it deposits, I suppose. Sorry, that was very long and rambling.
It was a very, very clear answer, thank you. We have a question from Claudine Letzer, who is our Green Party Women Membership Officer. What are the risks associated with BAME, in particular given the concerns of the current impact of COVID on these communities? Have you got any information, or is there any research that is being done in particular to focus on BAME, BAME groups?
I think people are looking into the effects of ethnicity and, you know, belonging to groups that live in different places in terms of the disease and also in terms of air pollution, but I'm not aware so far of someone trying to combine the two factors. But it is, of course, very important that that's done.
Rosie, would it be possible to get a comment from you on that particular issue? If I unmute you.
When it comes to air pollution, the BAME the community is disproportionately affected. And the fact that we're talking about air pollution and COVID, I would put a hypothesis. See, I'm expecting the BAME community to come out worse, purely based on the fact that their immune system might be already suppressed due to air pollution. They already live in areas of high air pollution, and they all already suffer from sort of asthma, strokes, heart attacks, and this is even before the virus has even started. So if that is their starting point, then that would tell you ultimately, I'm really interested in bus drivers. I've been trying to work that one out because I've got a few friends who work in shops who are also key workers, but it doesn't seem to have affected them as much. And I'm wondering whether, I have asked someone to look into this because I really don't have the resources, whether the fact that some of them have been driving a diesel bus for I don't know how long, is that, it's just a question I am asking. And normally my questions end up, there's normally something to it at the end of the day. But I think it's really interesting that if you go into a shop, you spend more time in front of a shop worker and they don't seem to be as affected as someone on a bus. But I'm concerned the fact that a lot of the buses were diesel. Does that have anything? But I am expecting the BAME community, I mean, I predicted this quite a while ago, to come out worse. And there's also the link with vitamin D, which I have heard. I don't know much about it. And if someone's medical here, they might be able to elaborate a bit more with vitamin D as well. But apparently that's also a factor.
Thank you.
Actually, I can say, I can't remember exactly where I read this. I think it was the Office for National Statistics, and they did have some data about which jobs were most affected, I think, with COVID-19. So I think they might also have some data on some other diseases. So it might be interesting to look at that. And if you want, I can try and find it for you.
Thank you. Our final question on this particular session was from Tina Rothery. Do we have figures on improved health, decreased death rates as a result of having locked down, eased pollution, etc.?
I think it's really complex, and also this is something that we wanted to try to model. But when you think about it, there's so many factors affecting the disease, because also like transmission is not only because if people stop meeting, obviously there will be less transmission. So you would also need to model like the movement of people, and to build such a robust model, which includes, all of these factors that we were talking about, like the weather, the population, the ethnicity, underlying health risk, like that would be a huge project. But I think this is what people want to do. It's just that, it will take a substantial effort to do that. But I think everyone wants to know that, and it would be great if we could do that.
Thank you very much. So we will thank our speakers, Dr. Liza Selley and Rebeka Popovic, for their contributions by getting rounds of applause there. Thank you very much. And also shout out to the MRC Toxicology unit at Cambridge University for the work that they put into this. We will now move.
Thank you.
I will now unmute you. Sorry, I'll now mute you and unmute Rosamund, Adoo, Kissi, Debrah, who is our newly appointed Green Party Women's spokeswoman on air pollution. If she can introduce herself and give a brief outline of her organisation Foundation and the work that she's involved with. Thank you, Rosie.
Yes, hello. I come in two disguises, actually. The first one would be my late daughter's foundation, which was set up by myself. It is called the Ella Roberta Family Foundation, and it was set up by myself and Dr. Colin Wallace from Great Ormond Street. He is a respiratory consultant, and towards the end of my late daughter's life, he was going to look abroad to see if there was anything they could do in order to help her. And the other role which I have is obviously the WHO as the advocate for health and air quality. So for those who don't know my story, just very briefly, my daughter became suddenly very ill in October 2010. And by the time of December, already, she had had her first visit to intensive care. And it's really interesting to mention intensive care now, especially with what's going on. And basically, over the next 28 months, not exactly 3 years, but 28 months, we went to hospital 28 times. And out of those, I think 4 of them, she was in intensive care. And for those of you who've had any experience of intensive care, it's not somewhere anyone would want to visit at all. And I must admit that COVID-19 has made me question many things about Ella's life. Number one, I don't know how she survived as long as she did, because I've seen the report I was mentioning to Liza from Stephen Holgate, how I've seen the final report that's been submitted to the coroner. How she survived as long as she did, I will never know. And the reason why COVID-19 interested me to start off with was when one of Ella's doctors said, "Oh, you're not going to believe what I'm going to tell you, but some of the people coming into the hospital, they seem to have similar symptoms to your daughter." So I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yeah. Mucus plugging, lung shutting down, and that cough." The cough was the thing that got Ella's lungs going most of the time. And so I think for me, that's the first time when I thought, there might be something in this. So I didn't really need to see any research. I must state on here, though, she never had a virus. But I was really interested in the fact of the mucus plugging and the lung shutting down, and the fact that having to roll them on their side, which we had to do with her to clear the airway, and especially that persistent cough. And I started to also get concerned when people who were recovering from COVID were coming on television talking, and they sounded breathless, exactly how she sounded. So that got me incredibly concerned. But I had been saying for quite a while, the more research I get sent on air pollution, I knew sooner or later something was going to happen. That's how I felt. And I was alarmed at the politicians not taking it very seriously. I am no longer alarmed by this. And we all know how much it has taken for them to move, how many people it took to die for them to even move. So I think all along, they used to just say enough to keep me happy. There was no radical action to clean up the air. And one of my statements which I make is, if the politicians, and I'm not just talking about the UK, worldwide over, if they had even tried to clean up the air properly, I personally don't feel as many people would have died. And I think research will end up proving me right on this. And it was very interesting in the beginning when the BBC kept on reporting the people that were dying. The other thing that got me alarmed is when they were mentioning the underlying health conditions, which are linked to, again, air pollution. So every time they kept on saying underlying health conditions, and they emphasized on that, that's when I personally thought there is going to be something in this, because people's immune systems due to air pollution is already compromised, as I've mentioned before, even before there is a virus. As we all now know, I mean, I never thought I'd be sitting here for today, and, you know, I didn't believe I would ever see clean air. I thought maybe that's something my children might have seen. And I think I've been quite shocked at, I knew the air was filthy, but I just didn't realize how much until I think it was a month after lockdown when the air started to clear and people really began to see it. And it gives me no joy. When people see me all the time, they say to me things like, oh, you must be really happy. Well, no, because we are heading to that 40,000 mark just in hospital of people dying. So no, it has sadly given me no joy, the clean air, because you can't relax enough to even enjoy it, because the numbers keep on piling up. But that basically shows also, you know, transport had to go down by 90% in order for us to get here. And we all know that as lockdown begins to ease, things are going to change. But the question is, how much? I think the government are well aware now. Grant Shapps, I have heard him speak, and they know that if they go back to where we were, things are going to be disastrous. I'm just going to be careful how I put this, because, you know, I don't know everyone's situation in there. We cannot go back to where we were before, because if you look at Wuhan, Lombard, New York, these are all areas of very high air pollution, including London. And interesting, they have the highest death rates. So again, this is hinting that there is going to be something linked to air pollution. And no, we can't go back to where we were. And I know people will start saying the economy, which is true, because, you know, people's mental health and things like that, which I appreciate. But people are living longer, well, depending on where you live. And people have all sorts of health, you know, conditions now. And we want people to live longer, but we also want them to live healthy lives. And for me, it's been quite torturous watching people sort of within 2 to 3 weeks pass away. It's been horrendous, because there's been, so I know within my circle, not directly, but acquaintances and people's friends, so 10 people. And that's probably because of the background, because I'm from the BAME community. I'm more likely to know people who would have passed away from it. And I haven't spoken to Ella's team. We are due back in court again, but I now feel more than anything that we have to win, in inverted commas, at all costs, because it's going to take something monumental like that in order for government and governments all over the world to do something about it. And as I mentioned, the figure from the WHO is 7 million, and that's both indoor and outdoor air pollution. And I know we don't mention indoor air pollution, and I mentioned it before we started, but if people could look at Stephen Holgate again in January this year, he did bring out a paper on indoor air pollution. And my concern moving forward is people who are shielding with health conditions, they are now indoors. And if the air indoors isn't great, that is going to further impact their health. And I am relieved the government is now telling people to get out more. I don't know whether they've been advised by anyone medical, but the quality of indoor air pollution is actually 13 times worse than outdoor air pollution. So I think, you know, we need to tell people there are things people can do about indoor air pollution. I mean, we mentioned wood burning, and it seems that the government are reluctant constantly to make these difficult decisions. I mean, they are not easy, you know. For instance, banning them, they're not going to be popular with people. But as I've always said, this is a matter of life and death. So we have to do what we can to preserve life, really. Luckily, it seems that young people are not as affected. There have been cases, I don't know, the last I heard, I think about 12. And for those families, my deepest condolences to them. But that's why I think, as I sit here now, I am slightly nervous about schools going back to, you know, they're meant to be resuming for tomorrow with the R rate being so close to 1. Of course, I am extremely concerned. But yeah, just to finish it off, that this virus, it sounds like it's going to be with us for quite a while. And my son, who's a budding scientist, tells me the chances, interesting what Liza says, the chances of a vaccine being successful, he tells me he's not hopeful, because he said, for instance, we get the flu jab every year and thousands still die every year from it. So if air pollution is a contributory factor, and we now know that's something we can do something about, it is such a shame it has taken this for the government to suddenly come out promoting walking, cycling. They knew all about this beforehand, and they put the economy before people's lives, basically. You know, let's be frank about this. And that's why, to some degree, I'm not saying they created the virus, no, but if the air was cleaner, I definitely believe, they've said since lockdown, they believe that due to the air pollution being low, it has saved 11,000 lives. I know that's just one study, but so can you see? And that's just taken, what, a month? So 11,000 lives have been saved due to lockdown. So I know on the one hand, it has cost us a lot in mental health, but regarding people dying, that has obviously improved. And we cannot go back. So those who are in charge of making decisions, they need to think very, very, very carefully. And I get worried when I hear the word temporary road expansion. It should be a permanent road expansion, not temporary. And I will say again, and I will email the respiratory consultants, that 1.1 million children in this country have asthma, and majority of them will be going back to school in September. And that's when asthma is at its peak. The 38th week, which is the second week in September, is where most hospital admissions happen in this country. So again, I know people are talking about September, but you can see why I'm incredibly worried, because 3 to 4 children in every classroom now have asthma. And this is being linked to, again, the filthy and toxic air that we've been breathing. Yeah, I'm going to end there rather than ramble on. And if, you know, Dawn, you want to ask me something, I think that might be a lot more better than me. I could quote figures, and because I live and breathe this every single day, you see.
Thank you. I'd first like to offer, on behalf of the Green Party Women Committee and from everyone here, our sincerest condolences about your daughter.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's important to mention that. Regarding your comment about schools going back and the school run, could you explain briefly why in particular the school run is particularly dangerous at a time for children with asthma, and the implications that it has for either parents who are sort of walking or driving their children to school, and what you think a solution to that problem might be?
Well, the school run, it has been monitored by King's College. That's when the air pollution is at its height. And one of the reasons why I was really interested in the Green Party women coming on board is I know for a fact that women and children are the ones most affected by air pollution the world over. So here, if you know, we talk about equality. Yes, men take their children to school as well. But on the whole, let's be honest again, and I'm always getting myself in trouble, it is still many mothers that take the children to school. So they are the ones who are most affected. And I think Liza mentioned about indoor air pollution as well with cooking. And again, when things have been looked at, women still do the majority of cooking in the house. So again, they are most affected. And how I became interested in women and air pollution is where my parents are from in Ghana. There's a huge thing to do with air pollution there and cooking, because a lot of the cooking in villages is done outside, and they use cooking stoves. And it has really affected the women over there. Yes, we can do something about it. Not everybody. I think, especially when it comes to primary school, most children go to schools within an area that you can walk or cycle or scooter to. And I would never blame anyone, because I think the car industry has made us reliant on cars. And a lot of people don't actually... I think most people know, but not everybody knows this. Yep, that's my son. Being in your car is worse than being out of your car, and that's not something we believe that when we are in our car, it is secure, and I think it's about getting that information out there. And I do appreciate that some people have to literally drop the children off and go and catch a train or how to get to work, and it's not always convenient to walk or cycle, but we could encourage. I think local councils need to have schemes. People like incentives, so I think maybe to incentivize people would be a good start.
I have a question that was sent in via email from Nathan Wood. I'm not sure if Nathan's on the call, but the question was regarding, during lockdown, it's estimated we spend around 98% of our time indoors. Places we know can be more polluted than outside, as you've just reiterated. Would the panel and would yourself support a call on the ventilation industry to up their game and innovate with proven clean air technology in the fight against poor IAQ and reduced COVID risks?
Yeah, I'll see what Liza or Rebeka want to say about that. But definitely, I think indoor air pollution, we have focused on the outdoor, and quite rightly so. But as I mentioned, indoor is, I mean, that's interesting. He said 98%, because before lockdown, it was 90%. These days, we do spend a lot of time indoors, and it's something we are going to have to look at. As I mentioned, this report that has come out, unfortunately I don't have it in front of me, but it's a very good report, and it lists numerous things we can do to help ourselves. But it is something we're going to have to look at in future, and especially with the group who are shielding. My understanding is they may be even spending longer inside their houses, so again, it's something that I am concerned about.
Could I unmute Liza and Rebeka to join this sort of conversation? I think we'll just, now we're coming up to 1 o'clock, if we sort of perhaps have answer questions that you feel might be relevant to that particular sort of comment. Any particular comments on cleaning the air inside the home with sort of specific ventilation filters and that kind of technological innovation?
I don't know a lot about the technological side of things, but I've definitely been to a presentation before where they showed a massive benefit of having windows open. Now, I don't know where that study was conducted, because of course that's going to depend a lot on where you live. If you live on a main road, you know, I used to live on a main road in London, and never would I open my windows because everything in the bedroom just turned grey. But now I live in the countryside, and I can feel that it's better. So that really does depend on where you live. So perhaps for places like London, then these ventilation systems are going to be very vital, as long as you change your filters regularly.
Yeah, I think also there's a standard that councils now have to, when they are building the property. It has completely gone out of my head, but there's a certain standard, and these new builds need to have ventilation systems in them. And I actually didn't know about it until recently, but there is a minimum standard that they need to have for ventilation. So again, in the future, that's something that's going to be looked at. As long as they are regulated, as long as they are cleaned. I know Sadiq Khan had some in schools as a trial. I don't know what the end results have been on that one, but it seems to be heading that way in the future, really.
I think that a lot of car companies are working on in-cabin filtration systems, and they're showing a benefit.
Okay.
But I don't know about in the home.
We have, going into the chat for questions, there were comments were made regarding during the presentation about just enjoying the peace and quiet that we're having since the masses of transport on the road system have been removed. Question has come from Andrea Carey-Fuller. What can be done to reduce indoor air pollution? We open our windows every day, but people might live in homes that are situated directly on polluted roads, which is what was mentioned before. Can be an advantage of doing this. What else can people do to reduce indoor air pollution? Obviously not using wood burners aside.
Just a small comment, I suppose, would be sort of some personal behaviours, like to reduce aerosols. For example, I try to use a roll-on deodorant rather than a spray. If I'm doing the cleaning, rather than a squirty thing, I use a bucket and something that I can pour rather than be spraying all around, because that's when I notice that I start to cough. Really sad, because I love them, but scented candles, they produce a lot of volatile organic compounds which aren't good for you. Things like shutting the window when I notice next door's got a barbecue. I don't know if there's sort of more organic furniture sort of ideas coming through, but that might be a beneficial thing, because you get a lot of chemicals put into like flame retardants, that kind of thing, and they're quite bad for you. I wonder if there's any companies that are producing more or less toxic versions that would be possible to look into.
I think some bleach as well. I remember my late daughter reacting very badly to bleach, you know, things with very strong smells. I think people need to be, and we do not have carpets inside the house as well, because again, so carpets, bleach. I mean, we can do a lot more about what goes on inside the house. We can't do anything about the air, but as Liza said, scented candles are definitely a no-no. Those plug-in things, that they are a no-no. So there are little things. There's quite a bit of research out there, so people can look them up. And for instance, we've been told that leather furniture is better than soft furnishings and different things like that. And I think in the bedroom as well, people need to be concerned about dust mites. So maybe the bedding and cushions, and there's quite a lot we can do actually.
We're getting several requests for an aggregation of some of the research points that you've listed, Rosamund. Is it possible to get sort of a list of some of your sources that we can then distribute through the Green Party Women Network? Thank you. Yeah. One of the comments that has come from Rosemarie, who I believe is former Green Party Women membership officer. There are initiatives in some boroughs, such school streets, which close the streets round the time school starts and finish to all vehicles except the residents. Each school needs a consultation. In Waltham Forest, these will be enforced by camera and steep fines. Do you have any comment on that, Rosamund, about how or perhaps how other people could introduce that particular system into their area?
The more school streets, the better. I actually like the France idea, going even further, where certain cars are not allowed to be on the road certain weekends and things like that. 65% of outdoor air pollution is from transport, and we need to find ways of getting around that. We all can't go back into our cars where we were ago now. So anything, more school streets, and not just for one day. They should be longer or permanent, really. And Mums for Lungs, I must give them a plug. They've done a lot of work in this field, and kudos to them. But I think again it's about education. A lot of people do not know the real, maybe people in this forum are all aware of it, but we can't assume that everybody out there is, and especially the health impacts of air pollution. And it's up to us who know about it to educate people about it, and then people won't feel as if you're forcing them out of it, out of their cars, that you're doing it for their health, because you care about them and how it affects them. Look, COVID-19, we're going to have to live with it for quite a while, and I get worried when I hear people say we are going to go back to where we used to be. Well, the virus is still with us, so we are going to have to change our ways, and we need to lessen the air pollution.
Thank you. We have a question from Loppy, which is, how do we sort out the catch-22 of public transport being better for the environment, but people now fear travelling in this way due to COVID-19 and may turn to cars if they can't walk or cycle, thus increasing air pollution and CO2?
Personally, I wish that electric vehicles were made more accessible to people. I've recently got a mortgage, I'm saving for a wedding. There is no way I can afford one of those cars, even with the help schemes. And I know I am definitely not in the minority there. People can't afford them, but they would be a way that we already have the technology to put a real dent in at least the exhaust emissions, not the non-exhaust ones, but it would be a help, I think.
Thank you.
I think we just need to drive less, whether we like, especially short journeys, you know, going to your local shop and things like that. We just need to drive less. There's no way around it. And I don't say much about it because I know public transport is very expensive, and where I live, not everyone can afford it. This is the other thing as well. The train needs to be reliable. I think in time, people will regain confidence about going back on public transport. But at the moment, I completely understand why people are weary and they would want to get back in their cars. But they need to understand that the pollution in the car is worse. So I must say that here. The pollution in the car is actually worse. And you'll be better off cycling. Cycling is the best form of transport, really.
We've had a question from Caddy Beck regarding heat exchange ventilation. I'm assuming that is referring to heat source air pumps, which use a differential between outdoor and indoor temperature to use as either air conditioning or heat conditioning heaters. And whether or not they, with filters, would be an appropriate ventilation system. Does anyone have a comment on that?
I don't know, but we can investigate and let you know.
I don't know any research on, I know quite a lot about heat source air pumps, but not necessarily about whether or not they would be specifically beneficial to cutting down pollution. I'm assuming that because they would all have filters, that might be an option, but we need to get more information on that. We have a question or comment from Carol Birch saying, is social distancing actually a red herring, and is in fact pollution more important? So should we be returning to public transport rather than driving cars? The bus driver health issue is a concern. Buses can also get close to each other, so the exhaust fumes from one would be close to the driver. So they should be advised to keep a distance from the vehicle in front. Any comment on that, Rosie?
Yeah, thank goodness my son didn't hear the bit about the social distancing, because he even thinks we should be further apart. I think he's talking about sneezing, and he's actually measured it. So I don't think he will accept it. It is a red herring. Look, yeah, the underground is not. I always try not scare people. This is the thing, you know. I think we all know how bad the underground is, but people also need to get to work. I find it very difficult what to say on this topic, and I think the reason being is my children will be cycling to school, or they can walk to school. They don't have to go on public transport. And having lost a child, and I can see why people are incredibly nervous and they would want to get back in their cars, but they need to think about the emissions. If there's a spike in air pollution, I must say on here, there will be more heart attacks and asthma attacks. And I'm sure Liza could back me up on that. Whenever there's a spike, there are more people admitted to hospital with heart attacks and asthma attacks. And we don't really want to go down that route. Getting back in the car is not going to be a solution, I'm afraid.
We have a comment from, a question from Addy Daly Borderzailing. Does the panel have any views on the use of face masks, both in respect to COVID-19 and air pollution?
I can talk about air pollution and face masks. If my late daughter was here, what would she would say to you? She'll say, "Oh, I know they don't work, Mum, but they make me feel better." So, and also I think before you wear, if you have asthma, please speak to your consultant first, depending on what you are wearing, because they can trap particles in them. Regarding COVID-19, I can only say to you what my neighbours have said to me, and she's from the Czech Republic and another country in Europe. She said over there, it seems to be working. It's by law there, everyone's got to wear it. And since then, apparently the spread of COVID has gone down. That's all I can comment on. Yeah, I couldn't say anything more than that. But regarding air pollution, I'm not sure whether there's any mask that can actually work. I don't know. The particles are so tiny. They are really, really tiny. They're like sand. So I'm not sure about. We've still got my late daughter's masks over here somewhere, and they obviously didn't save her. But then she used to cycle quite a lot. I mean, that wasn't going to stop her, by the way. So, but I think COVID-19 is slightly different. But one thing they do say is it won't stop you getting it. They have actually said that, but it stops the spread of it. So I think it's very. We have to listen carefully what they are saying to us. They haven't said it will stop you getting it, but it will stop the spread, which is slightly different.
Could you just briefly outline the differences between the masks that you're talking about? Because obviously some people are wearing surgical style masks, which will then stop, you know, the exhalation and the particles from spreading, as you say. But there's still, obviously, people are buying online the sort of the N95 respirators, which they believe are sort of stopping the inhalation of the particles. Do you explain briefly the difference between those two masks? And are you saying that the N95 ones are not as beneficial as we might think they are?
No, I just think I need to be careful on this, because I remember my son having a mask before all this started, and his team have spent a while weaning him off it, because they didn't want, after what happened with my daughter, they didn't want particles being trapped and him, you know, taking that in. I think people will have to make their own minds up. I don't know whether there's any science there. Maybe Liza or Rebeka can say. I don't know about any science that shows that these masks work 101%. I don't know of any, so I can't really endorse anything. I don't know whether they've got a different point of view on it.
I know just in terms of COVID-19, studies suggest that masks do help.
Right.
And I just think that they just protect you from sneezing, so it's more like you are protecting the others.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this is what I know about wearing face masks in COVID-19.
My concern, I have a few concerns actually. With the COVID-19, I worry that some of the homemade masks, they actually, you know, they get moist when you've been breathing on it, they're warm, and they're actually a bit of a breeding ground for germs. So if the virus does get in, you might actually be creating a situation for yourself within your mask. Also, I've found from experience in supermarkets, I'm seeing people getting quite confident because they've got their mask on, and they come a little bit close, but they've got big gaping holes in the sides. So I worry that unless you've got a very good mask that has been fitted properly, that it could be causing some contamination issues that you're not aware of. In terms of pollution, I do wear a mask in the lab when I'm using particles. Some of them are absolutely tiny. You can barely even see them with an electron microscope. They're that small. But I had an occupational health appointment, and they fitted the mask. They had me reading a poem, walking back and forth, waving my arms around, moving my head, just to make sure there were absolutely no gaps. And this is something that has been bothering me for quite a while. There are so many occupations where people are exposed to pollutants and they're not being given masks to look after them. Taxi drivers, as an example, the people that trim the hedges by the roadside, people that work in beauty salons. There's all these exposures that we don't have masks for, but perhaps we ought to.
Having lots of comments in the chat about people really enjoying the cycling options that are now being promoted by the government, and that there are obviously benefits to health impacts as well as the reduction of the pollution and the amount of traffic on the roadways. What I would like to do in the last sort of closing minutes of the session are to try and get sort of a summation of points where we as activists in the environmental sector can start to lobby government in terms of the pressures to sort of keep up the positive benefits that we've had as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. Just to clarify a point that was issued in the newsletter that we sent out on Friday, the link to the government funding was actually incorrect. It was, rather than the 2 billion that was released from central government, this is the shorter, reduced £250 million that is sort of short-term access for the local councils, and that we have approximately a week to lobby councils in order to make sure that this money is spent in the most effective way possible. Do you have any suggestions on what activists could do, and what would be the sort of the best sort of short-term solutions, or perhaps even long-term solutions, that we can do immediately to gain access to that funding in the most effective way? Let's start with Rosie.
What we can do to access the funding in the most... Remember, I started off by saying schemes to incentivize. I'm a passionate advocate about young people, and in my borough there's an obesity issue. That's the #1 health thing, and I'd like there to be a scheme whereby young people could be encouraged. I don't know whether Caroline is still around. There are rumours, my children tell me, about the bus passes being taken away from them. I don't know how true that is, but if that is, then I suggest that, you know, young people may have to get onto their bicycles, or if local councils have a scheme that young people can get bicycles from the council, because not everybody can afford a bicycle again. I have to say this because I come from quite a poor borough. So things that young people love getting rewards, you see. So it will kill 2 birds with 1 stone, as in air pollution, and they will become fitter as well. So that's what I think, because a lot of secondary schools have bicycle racks, but they are empty. Young people don't cycle. So, but also I think going forward as well, yeah, my 2 cycle, and I do get quite anxious as their mum. So if there could be separate cycle lanes, because I have gone to a Stop Cyclists rally before, and I am aware that every year about 100 people die on the roads through accidents. So if we are asking more people to get out there, then I think we need to make cycling as safe as possible. Because I do have quite a number of friends who are very pro cycling, but they are too worried about getting on their bikes, and quite rightly so. So maybe making cycling as safe as possible would be my thing, what I would say.
Thank you. And Rebeka?
I agree, and I also think it's important to just keep educating the general public, so that we are talking about air pollution not just because there's COVID-19, we're just talking about it because it is a serious problem. And then people, everyone, we can all come together and try to design solutions for those problems.
Thank you. And Liza?
I think it's quite important, sort of building on what Rebeka's saying about like getting the messages out to people, sort of showing people what you can do as an individual. I mean, it's quite easy to say, oh, people need to drive less, or the government needs to do that, but there are so many things that we can do as individuals. For example, decide this winter, no, I'm not gonna use a wood stove, or I'm not going to have a barbecue, I'm going to cook separately, but enjoy that dinner in the garden. Not using candles, walking, cycling as much as you can. There's so much that we can do as individuals that not everybody did before, but some of them, like the cycling, the COVID pandemic has actually showed us that we can do, and sometimes we enjoy doing.
So I'd just like to say thank you very much for everyone participating. Thank you to Dr. Liza Kelly from Cambridge University, to Rebeka Popovic from Cambridge University MRC Toxicology, and to Rosamund, who is our Green Party woman spokeswoman for air pollution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.